Hello and welcome to F1 Nation with me, Tom Clarkson. Just under 2 weeks from now, the season resumes in Austin, but fear not, we've got your weekly F1 fix sorted right here. Charles Leclerc's driver coach and the head of the Ferrari Driver Academy, Jock Clear, will join us shortly to talk all things Leclerc, Ollie Bearman, and why the latest crop of rookies are performing so well. But first, Natalie Pinkham is my F1 Nation teammate this week. Pinks, it's been a while. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. How are you? Good to be back.
I'm very well. Quite enjoying the break, I have to say. It's kind of weird not being at a race this week or coming back from a race. But the biggest story since the last race in Singapore has been the exit of Daniel Ricciardo from VCARB. And haven't spoken to you about it yet. What's your reaction to that news?
Wow, it's been emotional, hasn't it? I think a lot has been said about it. I think that Daniel is such a wholesome asset for Red Bull, the whole Red Bull family, but indeed the whole sport. And he really has brought in some new, curious fans to the sport, which has been great for everyone. And we started at the same race. We've been in the sport for exactly the same amount of time. And yeah, it's difficult to see him go. I think much has been said about it, and I don't want to labour that. It was disappointing that he didn't have the send-off that he deserved. But I think for me, Daniel just sees the joy in everything, whether that's racing or life generally. And I remember this one occasion in Spa where he had some sort of shocker, and I can't even remember the detail of it, but I'll never forget what he said to me in the pen, because I started with, I'm so sorry with the way today's gone. And he said, you know what, don't be sorry, because my worst day is still better than many people's dream day. And that kind of, for me, sums him up, that he just took the positives out of everything. And I think we will really miss that in the sport.
He's a class act.
Yeah, he really is. And he gets it. And he never sulks. Never complains, just puts a smile on things. And that is infectious, isn't it? I mean, you want to be around people like that in life.
And Pinks, after the race in Singapore, he knew it was his last race, yet he still went up to Liam Lawson after the race and said, good luck. You only get one crack at Formula One. Make the most of it. Almost brings a tear to the eye when you hear things like that. And do you know what? We had Christian Horner on the show last week, and one of the things he said is that Helmut Marko, Red Bull's advisor, motorsport advisor, wanted Daniel out of the car from Spain. So I've reevaluated, I think, what Daniel's done since Spain, knowing the added pressure that he had on him. And to think that he went, straight out and finished 9th in Austria with all that added pressure just shows that there was a steeliness behind the smile. Wonderful character, but my goodness, he wanted it as well. A competitive human being who was going to go out fighting. And actually, talking of going out, my one regret in all of this is that we didn't get to see him in the Red Bull. I would love to have seen what he could have done in that team. We know that he tested so well last year at Silverstone after the British Grand Prix in that car. And just in that environment, that familiar environment, whether that somehow would have brought the best out of him. Because there's no doubt in my mind that the best years of his career were at Red Bull. Christian Horner also said last week that 2014 he was probably the best driver on the grid. So sad that we didn't see him in the Red Bull, but just...
Yeah, it feels like unfinished business, doesn't it?
And if he'd gone to Red Bull and had his, and been beaten handsomely by Max Verstappen, then we would all go, okay, fair enough, you've had your day. But we still just don't know how he would have stacked up against Max. But anyway, Daniel, we will miss you. Now, Charles Leclerc is having arguably one of his best seasons in Formula One. The Ferrari driver has taken sensational victories at Monaco and Monza and has 9 podiums to his name, second only to Max Verstappen and Lando Norris, who have 11 each. That form puts Leclerc third in the drivers' standings, only 34 points behind Norris. So why is he having such a strong year, and how much more is there to come from him? Charles' driver coach is Jock Clear, and he knows him better than anyone. Jock, you're with us now. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Hi, I'm very well, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. Always good to speak to you guys. Yeah, so to come to the question, to Charles, I mean, we all know what he's capable of. We've seen that over a few years now, and his reputation in qualifying has certainly been cemented over those years. And in so much as people tended to say to me, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, yeah, but he's nowhere near as good in the race as he is in qualifying. And you think, well, that's not really fair. It's just that he's very, very good at qualifying. But that said, I think this year you have seen the result really of a development on the car side and a development on the driver side. That is to say that you recognise that there's no points on Saturday, and all the points come on Sunday. And therefore, I think it's probably true that we've shifted our focus slightly to making the car a better race car. Tyre management is, of course, always a hot topic. But we've seen Charles do some very good races. I remember back in 22 in Austria, where Max really struggled with tyre degradation, and Charles won that race with a really good drive. It's not that Charles historically hasn't been good on tyres. I think that it's we as a combination haven't been focused that well on tyres, and so I think what we've seen this year is the result of us being more focused on getting the car working really well in the race and looking after those tyres, and Charles learning from previous years and honing those skills of tyre management, but also race management, and I think he's responded well to a very strong teammate. I mean, we've long talked about the qualities of Carlos, and the fact is Carlos probably doesn't quite have that edge of pace that Charles can show in qualifying. But you look at Singapore last year, and that really hit home to Charles. That was a race that Charles, you would have said, would have gone there as a favourite to win Singapore. He often goes there with a lot of confidence, and of course for Carlos to nick that one under his nose really hurt. And I think that sort of thing has made him focus on, okay, I really need to get the job done on Sunday. And that's not to say he never thought that, but it does mean you change your focus slightly. If you take it away from, okay, we just need to get the best qualifying car we can and get a qualifying lap, and then it'll all happen on a Sunday. So I think you're just seeing a better representation of Charles and of us as a race driver, as a race car, as a race team.
Just describe your role as a driver coach. It seems strange, doesn't it, to think about the very best drivers in the world having coaches at all. But I guess with other sports, they have coaches. But just tell us what it is that you bring to Charles.
Well, I think the role has sort of emerged over the last 10 years, 12 years maybe. And actually it was something that it sort of came from Michael and Ross when I was a race engineer 2010, and I shifted role 2011, and I swapped sides of the garage, and I worked on Michael's side as a driver coach more than a race engineer, and it was Bono's first year as a race engineer, so I was giving him the benefit of my experience and getting him up to speed. But also Michael and Ross were very comfortable with having someone with a lot of experience who was just looking at the bigger picture, and the bigger picture is, why are you here 5 minutes late? Oh, media wanted me to do this thing. I had to go and do the fan forum, and then I had to come back. The transport wasn't ready, which isn't normally a race engineer's worry. But then you think, okay, I need to go and talk to media and say, actually the driver needs a bit more time between these events because he's arriving and his head's not really in the right place. And then, things like, the race engineer is worrying about tyre pressures and front flap angles in qualifying. And you're like, okay, but by the tone of your voice, Michael, I don't sense that you were particularly comfortable before that run. What was the problem? Oh, yeah, well, we had this, and the guys at the front of the car seem to have a problem with the front blanket. Okay, so we need to talk to the guys. Look, you try and calm things down. All this sort of thing that I think impacts the driver, but isn't the first focus of all of those people. You have 60 operational people. and none of them are looking specifically at, okay, what's the environment we're creating for the driver? So that sort of evolved over since that time with Michael. We've sort of worked on that role, and I think other teams have done the same, and we have a driver coach on both sides obviously now, and that is really what other sports have been doing for a long time. You look at golf, and that is what the caddy does. The caddy isn't a better golfer than the player, but he's got a lot of experience, and he's saying, you sure you want that club? Because when you took that out, you sort of hesitated with I'm not really sure this is the right club. So let's stop and think. Are you sure you want the 7, or are you going to go for a 6? Because normally you do a 6 off here. Oh, actually, yeah, you're right. I'm going to go 6. It's that sort of thing that, and it's different for every driver. It's different for every scenario. It's not like we have a pattern of I do this, and this during the weekend. It's depending on what the issues of each weekend are, and the human side of their performance, I suppose.
It's so interesting because you've got to read him and pick up on his tells and understand him inside out.
Yeah, I mean, I think that happens anyway, and honestly, I think someone, Brian Bozzi, who's now his race engineer, has been working with him ever since he's been at Ferrari as well. So Brian knows him just as well. But it's we're a good little group, if you see what I mean, and we have Johannes as the performance engineer, and between the 4 of us, we sort of cover everything, and it's not like, again, it's not so much that my role is to deal with where his head's at. It's not like Brian will say to me, you need to talk to Charles because his head's in the wrong place. We'll talk as a group, but I will bring up that, I'll sort of say to Brian, away from Charles, be careful what you're doing at the moment because I get the impression that Charles isn't fully believing in this direction we're going in. Maybe you want to talk to him about that again, because when you walked away, he had this sort of look on his face that said, oh, well, okay, we'll do it, but I'm not sure. So it's not that I'm specifically having that really close relationship with Charles. Brian has to have that relationship as well. But I think I'm bringing something in, making sure that relationship covers all aspects and doesn't just get drawn down the route of, yeah, but the simulation says we have to do this, and we should have this much front wing, and we should have this rear ride height, and that's what the simulation does, and this is why we're doing it. You have to bring in the human aspects. And I mean, interestingly, I spent some time with Jacques Villeneuve over the weekend last week. We actually went on a bit of a road trip. So we were in the car for a few hours and talking about all this sort of thing. And you all know Jacques of old, and he can be difficult. He's got some different views, and he comes at things from different angles. But of course, this was right up his street. This is why he and I gelled so well, and this is what he brought from Indy when he came to Williams and sort of challenged Patrick and Frank a little bit, in so much as the driver had an opinion, and where the driver was at mentally and what he could bring to the game mentally was actually of great value. And so, we talk about this thing quite a lot, and that human aspect is true of everybody in the team. And it's not just Charles that I'm doing this with, and that's my focus on a Saturday and Sunday. But actually, throughout the week, and while I'm here and while Charles isn't here for these 3 weeks, most of what I'm doing is talking to people about, how do you feel about this? Are you comfortable with what we're doing? Are you comfortable with the people you're working with? How can we improve this? How can we make you feel happier? All that sort of thing is relevant to everybody. It's just maybe a little bit more acutely relevant to a driver going into a qualifying session, but it is relevant for everybody.
Jock, you've won world championships. You've talked about Jacques Villeneuve. You've mentioned Michael Schumacher. You know what these guys need at the very top level. Does Charles have it? Does he have everything in his armory to win a world championship?
Yeah, absolutely. He's got what it takes to be a world champion. I've said that from 2018. Obviously, we worked with him in the academy. We've seen all the right things at all the right stages. He's got the qualifying pace. My God, he's got I mean, I honestly think he's the best qualifier we've seen. It is difficult to go back as far as Michael and Mika and people like that, but he is the best qualifier for sure. And his race management, you look at Monza, it's just exceptional. When everything's lined up, he can deliver. It's one of those things that I've often battled against, mentioning no names, but if I give you the words, you'll know exactly whose mouth they came from. There was a lot of, we pay him a lot of money, he just needs to drive the fucking car. And you're like, if you think that's what it's all about, you're missing something, because there's a whole lot of stuff that needs to go on to get all those ducks lined up. And so the only hesitation I would have is Charles hasn't been in that situation yet where, I mean, 2022 was a good example. And I think you would look back at 22 and say, was that genuinely a chance for Ferrari to win a world championship? You have to say, yes, it was, because at one point we were 40 points ahead in the championship, or in the drivers' championship. And we were in a position to beat Max at a lot of circuits. So we weren't ready as a team. And I think the way the development went, Red Bull outdeveloped us by the end of the year. And certainly the ducks didn't all line up, but certainly, you know, there were things that Charles would say were not at championship level during that year throughout what we did. But that is exactly the point. You're not going to win a championship until all of you are at that level. You know, it's unfair to say that Mercedes only won all those championships because they had the best car. They had the best everything. And it's the same with Max in the last 3 years. He's been very good, but Red Bull have been very good. So when Charles is going to perform at that level, we need to perform at that level with him. And my point when I say confidently, yes, he is. When we're all at that level, I know he will perform at that level. I know that he can do what's required when all of us are punching at that weight. So when we are in a position and we as a team deliver a car consistently to challenge for championship, which I think we're on the brink of now, Charles will deliver.
Hear that? That's the sound of success, powered by Shopify, the ultimate commerce platform designed to help you launch, manage, and scale your business with ease. Whether you're selling crafts or custom clothing, Shopify is built for businesses of all kinds. Sell online, in person, or even on your favorite social media marketplaces like Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. And what I love about Shopify is that it empowers entrepreneurs at every stage of their business, and you don't need to be a tech expert. It comes with everything you need to grow, so no coding or design skills required. From an intuitive POS system to a seamless e-commerce solution, you'll have full control over every part of your business. And with their award-winning support team and full library of business resources on your side, you'll never feel alone on your journey. It's time to get serious about selling and get Shopify today. This is Possibility, powered by Shopify. Sign up to a £1 per month trial period at shopify.co.uk/nation, all lowercase. Go to shopify.co.uk/nation to take your business to the next level today. Shopify.co.uk/nation. F1 Nation is an official F1 podcast. Why not check out the others? F1 Beyond the Grid for in-depth interviews with F1's biggest stars, and F1 Explains for expert answers to your questions on how the sport works. Find F1 Beyond the Grid and F1 Explains on your podcast app and the F1 YouTube channel. Plus, download the official F1 app and follow us on social media for all the latest news.
Well, the head of Ferrari Driver Academy, Jock Clear, is still with me and TC here on F1 Nation. And we've spoken a lot about Charles Leclerc. So let's focus now on the future stars of the sport, because the latest crop of F1 rookies have really caught the eye. Oscar Piastri obviously did a phenomenal job in his first season, as now a multiple Grand Prix winner in his second year. Ollie Bearman, Franco Colapinto and Liam Lawson have all made very strong first impressions since making their debuts. So Jock, just tell us, why do you think the rookies seem to be driving so well as soon as they arrived in F1?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think it is a testament to the academies, all of the academies. I think it's probably a testament to the way the lower formulae have aligned themselves with F1 generally. We have very good relationships with with the junior Formula teams. Junior teams are coming to us and saying, our young drivers would be much better on a Sunday if they could manage their tyres better. What can we tell them? What have you learnt? So I think you're seeing a bit of a bleed off from F1 down through the junior Formula better than it would have been in the past. And I think when you look at Jacques arriving in F1 and qualifying on pole in his first race, I mean, he was 26 years old. He'd won Indy. It's a very different scenario. And he'd done 27,000 kilometers of testing in that car before he went to the first race. So you think, how on earth is it possible that Bearman can get in a car that he virtually hasn't driven and qualify P11 and race to P7 in his very first event, having never tested that car and not had those 27,000 kilometers of testing? I think the simulators now are very good. And that is a natural progression of the technology. As soon as you say to an F1 team, you can no longer go testing. You no longer have the opportunity to drive round and round Fiorano all day, every day. Then F1 teams will be quite aggressively developing some other way to do exactly the same job. Nobody in F1 ever accepts, okay, well, if you can't do testing, we'll probably just be less prepared than we used to be. No. Everyone in F1 says, right, how do we make sure we are just as well prepared as we used to be when we had, I think they did just under 100,000 kilometers of testing in 2002 or 2003 with Michael. How do we make sure we're just as ready to perform? And we find ways, and the simulator is the obvious way. And the fidelity of simulators is at such a good level now that what we see with Colapinto and with Ollie is the result of that. Actually, when they get here, it's not all alien to them. They know what to do with the tyres. They know what to expect. The circuits that they've never driven at, they have driven at. The virtual circuit that they drive on in the simulator is so good that actually they're like, oh yeah, this is just like it. Either the building on the left, and I know that I brake just after the tree on the right. It's all there. And I think, a lot of what we do here with our young drivers is in the classroom. We give them lessons. We meet with them for an hour on a Monday and a Wednesday and a Thursday, and we talk about how the car works and what the brake balance is doing and what you need to do with the tyres. And I hope that what you're seeing in Ollie and Franco is a result of that sort of education. And of course, the great thing about the Ollie experience in Saudi is it effectively vindicated and valued the whole F2 grid. I think there's no one in the F2 grid now, below, I was going to say below 10th in the standing, but given that Ollie's 16th in the standing, maybe you have to go all the way down to, but do you know what I mean? There's no one in there who an F1 team now is going to look at and say, yeah, it's probably not worth looking at him. He's going to be a liability.
Obviously, there isn't room for all of them. And you've just mentioned yourself, Ollie's down in 16th, and yet he has excelled when he's stepped up to F1. What does this mean, and what does it say about F2 as a series when actually winning it doesn't guarantee you a spot in F1? It often comes down to other things.
Well, I would say in our sport, we've had a history of believing that if you win something, then it's only fair that you get an opportunity. So if you win F2, it's only fair that you get an opportunity to move to F1. Well, I think the mindset needs to change to the whole of F2 needs looking at. And you're never going to win the F2 championship and not be a good driver. But there will be people out there who haven't won the F2 championship, and you don't want them to be missing out just because it didn't go their way on a couple of occasions. And now, because the winner has won it, okay, he's the guy that's going to get the seat. You've seen it with Lando, for example. I think Lando was runner-up in the year that George was there. So George won it and Lando was second, and Lando's just as meriting of a place in F1 as George is. The point with Ollie is he had only done one F2 race this year when Fred said to me, Carlos isn't very well, we're going to have to put Ollie in the car. I hope he's ready. And I said to Fred, he's ready. I've no doubt he's ready. Call him up because I think he's ready. And that Saturday, Sunday in Saudi was obviously a great experience for him, and he proved himself. But the point was, we didn't need to see what he was doing in F2 to already know he was a guy who was going to be able to cut it in F1. Again, I think that's healthy, because if you just wait until they're 18, 19 years old and then decide whether you want them in F1, you're not looking deeply enough into what you need in an F1 car.
Jock, I get your point about simulators and how that helps preparation. And let's take it back to Jeddah, Ollie Bearman. I think it was 14 seconds a lap faster in F1 than he'd been when he got his pole position in F2 the day before. I get that simulators help that, but what do these guys still have to learn when they hit the big time that they can't prepare for through a simulator, or they don't have the experience in F2, F3?
It's very subjective. I think it depends on the driver, depends on the character. If you said it was, the pressure of operating at this level, then I would say to you that wasn't true of Oscar. I don't think Oscar needed to get used to the pressure of driving at this level, because Oscar is supremely calm. In general, tyre management and tyre husbandry is very, very tricky, and seasoned drivers still slip up on occasions where they get it wrong, and their deg is disastrous, and the race falls apart because they misread the tyres and or qualifying, getting the tyre exactly where you want it in qualifying. I think that really is a very dynamic art that you just need a bigger and bigger database in your own head of, okay, what am I going to do now? How much am I going to lean on this front tyre that I'm going to be able to get away with? I think that database needs to be filled up over time, and there's no substitute for that. So I think that is one thing that will continually make you a better driver as you build your experience in an F1 car. But the rest of it is really subjective. I think there's drivers out there and who can arrive and bang, they can deal with everything straight away, in terms of the pressure, in terms of what they got to do, in terms of how they handle the car. And there's others that are slow burners. Ironically, I would say Ollie is a bit of a slow burner. I would say Ollie is not someone who's going to go bang.
Oh my goodness!
Exactly, and that's why that's why I'm actually even more excited about him in the medium term than I am in the short term. Somebody said to me straight after Saudi, well, it'll be interesting to see if Carlos hasn't fully recovered for next week, then maybe Ollie can get another go. Maybe he'll get a second chance. And I sort of thought, I hope he doesn't, because, Saudi was so good. It would be good for him to consolidate that, give him time to think about that. And actually, you couldn't have written the script better, because having an opportunity in the Haas gave him exactly that. And I think the performance in the Haas, personally, I think that was slightly better than the performance in the Ferrari, because actually, he was really disappointed not to be in Q3 in that Haas, because he dropped 3/10 on himself in the middle sector. And he very well should have got through to Q3. He was quick enough to get through to Q3. And then his race was very good. And he took his opportunity at the end to jump his teammate. And he did everything right in that Haas drive. And I thought, yeah, that's what Ollie will do. You give him time to think about it and develop, and he will keep improving. And I think he was better in that Haas than he was in the Ferrari, because he's just got that bit more experience.
But we talked a lot about the communication between F1 and F2 and the sharing of all important knowledge for those drivers to take the step up. Do you believe we're doing enough to guarantee the pathway of a young woman to come through to F1?
This is a very, very good subject, and one I'm passionate about, partly because I have daughters and I've seen it firsthand. Particularly, my daughter's doing mechanical engineering at university, and when she was 6 or 7 or something like that, and I had conversations with teachers then at elementary school, and I thought, you actually don't know what an engineer is. Maybe you don't need to know, but the fact is, you should know that at 6 or 7 years old, kids are in an environment where they're already being pushed one way or the other, because teachers who they deal with every day, and they're not, a 6-year-old isn't sitting down and saying, okay, miss, should I be an engineer? I'd quite like to be an engineer. No, they're not having that discussion, but they are involved with teachers who are thinking that an engineer is somebody who works in a garage. And that's, if you want to go and get your car repaired, that's what an engineer does. They don't realize that engineers put rockets into space and land on the moon. And create the internet and all of these things. And so from a very early age, we're just not getting girls to see these paths as available to them. And I think we now as a sport are doing quite a lot to try and open those pathways for girls to drive at this level. But it starts very, very early, which means that if we're doing quite a lot now, and you look at what Susie's doing and all the teams are invested in this, it's not going to manifest for a long time because it's going to take another 10, 12, 14 years before we see the result of this. And there is no shortcut. Finding the girls who are at the caliber of Ollie and Franco and Oscar is simply a statistics challenge. If you take so few girls, and of those few girls who are interested in going racing, some of them manage to find the money by the time they're 12 years old to go karting, and karting is seriously expensive. And of those 12-year-olds, a few of them are going to come to our attention at 15. Statistically, that model is just going to fail at the moment because there's so few doing it. And what is also impacting is that what we overcame with the guys maybe 30 years ago, maybe the period of Mansell, post-Senna, probably into Mansell, Damon Hill, and then, of course, Michael. I think that changed the mentality. Being a racing driver became an option for young men, young boys. And a 6-year-old thought, I could play cricket, I could play rugby, I could play football, I could be a racing driver. At the moment, we're making great progress. Girls at 7 years old now think I could be a footballer, I could be a rugby player, I could play tennis, of course, they've always been able to play tennis, but we're breaking new grounds, but they're still not thinking I could be a racing driver. And that is changing at the moment. F1 Academy and what Susie's doing and the great sort of publicity that we're getting from the F1 Academy is out there. It is changing minds, but it's going to be now. The acid test is whether 6, 7-year-olds who are very talented, because don't forget, you've got to find people who have a genuine talent. So a 6, 7-year-old that has really good hand-eye coordination, has really good strength of character, has the will and the grit and the determination that Ollie had, that Lando had, that Charles had when they were 7 years old, decides I'm not going to be a tennis player, I'm not going to be a downhill skier, and I could be a very good one. I'm going to be a racing driver. And when that option becomes available to them at 6, 7, 8 years old, then we'll see the kind of girls that are going to be able to cut it at the very highest level. The girls who are fighting out there at the moment are of the highest level. They just haven't had anything like the background that they would have needed to get to Oscar's level, if you see what I mean, because it didn't exist. So they're having to tag on to the end of the process far too late. And unless you get it started very, very early, it's going to be a real challenge. And you're always going to find the one-off. You're always going to find, you can say, yeah, but so-and-so didn't start racing till he was 17. There's always going to be the one-off. But if you want to find a consistent high level of girls driving racing cars, it has to be statistical in the same way as it was with guys.
To achieve that, Jock, would you like to see the F1 teams putting more money into karting, focused on girls?
I would like to see the sport generally, and I say that because I don't want to put all the emphasis on F1 because it's the highest profile. That's not fair to the F1 teams. There's some very high profile motorsport out there. We're not the only people with, there seems to be, or there is a bit of a mindset that we're the golden goose. F1 is where all the money is. And if only they shared a bit more of it. There's a lot of money all over the sport. When
Yeah, but if we were to shift perception globally, it has to come from the highest echelons, doesn't it?
I mean,
we need to be shouting about it in order to sway those 6 and 7-year-old girls and show that it is accessible and it is a viable pathway for them.
Yeah, and I think we're doing that as best we can with the very few girls we've got available to us at the moment who can operate at this level. But in my view, I would like the sport generally, and clearly we in F1 would need to lead that because we are the beacon, so to speak, that any young kid is going to aspire to. But I think I would like to see the sport generally committing itself to funding the whole path, not just for girls, but for boys and girls. Because if you fund it all very healthily from an early age, then it becomes available to everybody. All the time that the funding is very, very difficult, you are effectively making it a difficult path for anybody to tread, and therefore you're going to lose people along the way who are the genuine talents. And so I think I would like to see F1 and the sport generally fund the ladder all the way down to up to karting, such that anybody with talent at 12 years old can see that, okay, as long as I'm good enough, I'm going to make it, because, funding is not going to stop me as long as I'm good enough. It needs to be a meritocracy, obviously, but to make it a pure meritocracy, somebody has to fund that ladder other than the kids themselves. And at the moment, the kids themselves are funding it. From the very grassroots, the kids are funding it.
Jock, what a chat. Thank you very, very much. I feel we've covered a lot of ground with both your work at the FDA and, of course, with Charles. Thank you for your time. Best of luck with the last 6 races coming up. More wins for Charles Leclerc, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we're in a situation where 4 cars, maybe more, can go to each race now thinking we could win this one. And that's fantastic feeling. It really is. That's what this is all about, honestly. And we don't mind that we're having to battle McLaren and Mercedes and Red Bull all at the same time now. We much prefer this sort of challenge to, the constant battle of trying to keep up with Max, or trying to hope that we can catch them out. And that's quite demoralizing. But yeah, this is really healthy at the moment. It's a great sport to be in at the moment.
Bring it on. Absolutely
bring it on.
Although he has won Monaco and Monza now, so it's kind of like the 2 biggies. I'm not sure how he's going to top that.
Well, honestly, I think if you spoke to him, he would say he's very happy to have won those 2. They're 2 great, they're 2 iconic races in any year, but to win both of them in the same year. But that means nothing to him when he goes into qualifying in Austin next week. He is going to want to win that just as much. That's the great thing about sport at all level. Once you get on the playing field, it's just all about beating the guy that's next to you on the day. And that adrenaline rush is there every week for us.
Jock, many thanks for your time. Really appreciate it.
Cheers, Tom. Cheers, Natalie.
Thanks, Jock.
Great to speak to you.
This is an advertisement from BetterHelp. Let me ask you something. Do you ever feel like you're holding back? Like you're not showing the real you? I'm sure we all feel like it at times. It's like you're wearing a mask, but going through the motions, not letting people see what's really going on or how you're truly feeling. October is all about masks and costumes, but for many people, those masks stick around all year. At work, in social situations, even with family. It can be so easy to get used to hiding in the shadows. But therapy can change that. With BetterHelp, you can learn how to embrace every part of yourself and not just the acceptable parts. Therapy isn't just for people dealing with big traumas. It's about learning how to set boundaries, develop positive habits, and really feel empowered to live as your authentic self. So let's leave the masks for Halloween this season and start living without them. With more than 5,000 therapists in the UK already, BetterHelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a wide variety of expertise in mental health. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/F1Nation. That's betterhelp.com/F1Nation.
Well, I loved our chat with Jock, didn't you, TC? I mean, he gives such a great level of insight. I think my takeaway from it was that I was heartened, encouraged, inspired by his clear passion for bringing girls and women into the sport. But this is a very long game. If we're going to get it right, we can't tick boxes. We can't make token gestures. We have to do this from the bottom up. And clearly, Susie is doing a brilliant job, but it's going to take a lot of work, a lot more work to really shift mindsets and perceptions. I go in and do little talks at my kids' school all the time. And actually, the boys and girls' eyes light up when I say, look, this is a possible option for you going forward. So Yeah, we need more jocks in our community, and hopefully that will fundamentally and ultimately make a difference.
And Pinks, what came across with everything he said is the man is a realist. And I agree with everything you've just said about getting a woman into Formula One and winning the World Championship. But I love the fact he's a realist, and I think that must be such a positive influence on Charles Leclerc. He's not going to sugarcoat anything in his discussions with Charles about what the car's doing or what Charles could be doing better. He will say it exactly as it is, and I'm sure that's why him and Charles have such a good relationship. And when you hear him talking about working with Jacques Villeneuve back in 1996, he has a wealth of experience that any Formula One team would be silly not to capitalise on.
Yeah, you need to be a realist with big dreams, don't you? A realist with ambitions, a realist with passion, and he clearly has all of that.
He does indeed. Jock, thanks again for your time. Well, look, Pinks, before we go, there's been one big news story since last week's show. Alpine are now going to buy power units from another manufacturer from 2026 after Renault confirmed that they will end their Formula One engine program at Viry-Châtillon at the end of 2025. Now, this is big news because Renault have been a big part of the sport since entering back in 1977. So for 47 years, their engines have been a constant on the grid, either as Renault or badged as something else like Supertech or Mechachrome. And as an engine supplier, they've won a total of 19 drivers and constructors titles, while their own team won both championships with Fernando Alonso in 2005 and 2006. So, Pinks, this is big news. I'm delighted, by the way, that no one at Viry is going to lose their job because the engine facility is being turned into an engineering centre for Renault and Alpine cars. So that's the first positive to tick. I see this as a straight business transaction in the eyes of the people running the team now. I remember Bruno Famin, who was the team principal up until the summer break, telling me that the cost of developing their own power unit in Paris is about $120 million, whereas you can buy a power unit from another manufacturer as stipulated in the regulations for 17. So it's €100 million swing to the good if you go and buy a power unit. So from a business point of view, I understand it. From a performance point of view, we don't know. There's a lot of speculation that Mercedes are doing a great job with their 26 power unit, but equally, why can't the guys and girls at Alpine have been doing a great job as well? So we won't know that.
Well, what we do know, TC, is that you can succeed and not produce your own power unit. Just look at McLaren right now. And it's pretty incredible to see them outperform Mercedes as a customer team. We seem to have been sort of entrenched in this view that you have to produce your own power unit if you want to be at the front, because why on earth would you get a better deal than your supplier? But they have made it work, and perhaps Alpine have been inspired by that. And as you say, a huge saving. And the way that things were running before them wasn't working. So it feels like dynamic, strategic changes needed to be made and have been.
Yeah, and Enstone can now focus on the chassis, which is, they've got everything they need in Enstone to produce a race-winning chassis. So if they go for the Mercedes, which is what's being rumoured for 2026, then if that's a good power unit, I think we could see Alpine back up there. All right, well, that's it for this week. Pinks, thanks for your time as ever.
And you, TC, good to see you smile again. And I will see you. I won't be in Austin, but I will be in Mexico.
Well,
so I'll
look
see you
forward
there.
to that. And big thanks again to Jock Clear for joining us. A few notices. This week's guest on F1 Beyond the Grid is former Haas team principal Günther Steiner. That's available here on your podcast app and the official F1 YouTube channel from Wednesday. And the latest episode of F1 Explains. Aston Martin test and reserve driver Stoffel van Dorn answers your questions. So tune into those two. Thank you very much for listening as ever. We will, of course, be back next Monday with our preview of the United States Grand Prix in Austin. But for now, F1 Nation is produced by Formula One and Audio Boom Studio.